Okay, it is now 11:40, and so if I could invite Mr. Keogh, as promised, to speak at length.
Hopefully not too lengthy, sir. Thank you. Just wrapping up a few points. I didn't want to interrupt the flow of discussion earlier on, but just again on the procedural point raised by others. I was on leave last week, and again I only got to see the updated housing needs assessment yesterday afternoon. So again, there's a lot of information to digest there, and in the other submissions that were made last week. So again, I would ask for some leeway in terms of being able to respond to that if we do find the need to respond on further consideration of those documents. Just to go through to get to the key question that's asked in 1.2, does the provision in the plan properly and pragmatically reflect the need? Well, as you can see from my written submission, we believe it clearly doesn't, for the reasons we set out there. I think the first point is that the Council have referred to policy H10 and GB4 as delivering affordable housing, but they are not delivery policies. They are simply policies that set criteria as to the amount of affordable housing the Council will expect from sites as they come forward. The actual delivery of affordable housing is through the allocations, primarily through the allocations. And I'm not going to refer to detailed numbers here, sir, because they're all set out in my paper. But on the key figure of the 3,600, which the Council are predicting throughout the plan period, the first point to note is that the lion's share, over 70% of affordable housing delivery, is expected from strategic sites. And as we're all aware, many of those strategic sites have been pushed back into the later stages of the plan period, and that clearly has an impact, therefore, on the affordable delivery from those sites. And I've set out in paragraph 1.2.10 of my paper that I think the delivery going on the trajectory and using the affordable percentages the Council expect from each strategic site, taken from their paper EX-CYC 36, and applying those percentages to the updated trajectory, I work out there's a reduction of about just under 650 units from strategic sites in the plan period. And what that does is it brings the overall delivery down to about 2,708, just under 2,780, compared to the 3,600 that the Council were anticipating. I've slightly amended that trajectory that was presented, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, because there are one or two sites that I think that, again, the slightly optimistic delivery projections, the land north of Monk's Cross and the ST14, I've just pushed those back a year, again, just to make it very clear, so we're not taking any issue whatsoever with those allocations. We're simply trying to be pragmatic about the delivery. So that's our estimate, is that the affordable delivery is down from 3,600 to just under 2,780. And then, of course, the issue which you touched on yourself this morning. It's bad enough that the delivery has been very poor in recent years, as evidenced in Table 2 in my paper. So in the first year of the plan, for which data is available, there were 45 affordable completions against a Council estimate. If you go on their 3,600 figure, they were looking at about 220 units a year. In the first year of the plan, we got 45 units. There's no data available. They haven't updated the paper CYC 36 has not been updated, which is unfortunate because obviously affordable housing is a key issue for this Council and for this local plan. And I've indicated in my table 2 where I was able to get data for information for right-to-buy sales for 2019, 20, and 2020, 21. And the right-to-buy sales have been continuing at a reasonably high level, not as high as in some of the previous years, but they're still continuing. In terms of question 1.3, should the housing requirement be uplifted to reflect the need for affordable housing? Before I answer that, the context for that, sir, is that goes to the heart of the issue of flexibility within the plan. And it's an issue which we have discussed at length in previous sessions in relation to the setting of the Greenbelt boundaries and what the housing requirement should be. I'll just make this point. If this plan were to be adopted as is right now, the ability to adapt in future years to changing circumstances would be incredibly limited, because we would have, of course, set Greenbelt boundaries for the first time in a local plan. And therefore, given the extremely low rate of affordable housing delivery over the past few years, if the council wanted to, if in 5 years' time, let's say, the figures were still so poor that an adjustment was considered necessary in the form of either an extension of existing allocations or a new allocation or a new site, again, that would all become extremely contentious, because we would be into the realms of, I'm now going to show myself up here, very special circumstances with an approved, adopted Greenbelt. So is there an uplift required? Well, we clearly believe there is, for the reasons that we have set out in our paragraph 1.3.5 of our matters paper. We've had persistent under-delivery stretching back to 2004-05, and that's set out in the Council's EXCYC 36. We have a very high level, as has been admitted and has been acknowledged, acknowledged, a relatively high level, well, a very high level of affordable housing need relative to the OAN. We've had significant under-delivery of affordable housing in recent years. We've had a relatively high loss of affordable housing stock as a result of the right to buy. We now have reduced level of affordable housing supply from strategic sites. And of course, the delivery of affordable housing is incredibly sensitive to any further slippage in the trajectory of those sites. The Council is increasingly relying on high level of windfall units within the local plan in order to bolster its supply figures. But again, as we all know, windfall units deliver relatively little, if any, affordable housing. And of course, we've got the relatively high level of student completions, which are included in the supply, relative to the OAN. I said there's a relatively high level of student completions relative to the OAN. For the latest figures, student completions currently account for more than 2 years of the OAN. But again, student housing, those figures deliver no affordable housing. And then we have the acknowledged problem of affordability in the city, one of the highest or lowest levels of affordability, depending on which way you look at it, but one of the least affordable places to live in Yorkshire, if not the country. So for those reasons, sir, we believe, firstly, an uplift is justified in order to help improve the prospects of the delivery of a reasonable level of affordable housing. So I think we said earlier that the affordable housing was delivering, it was 3,600, it would be about 38% of the affordable housing need. Yeah, if you go on our figures, it falls to below 30%, given the shortfall in supply from strategic sites. Just two other points that I'd like to pick up on that were mentioned in your exchange of questioning with the council. The first question you asked was an interesting one, which is whether the council had considered any uplift to housing supply. And the council has considered and had considered uplift. And again, it's set out in our evidence at the various stages of the local plan stages. But just to remind you, it was the January 2018 January 2018 local plan working group, in which the report to the working group, I think it was 23rd of January 2018, the officers recommended an increase in the housing requirement figure in order to make the plan more sound. And a range of options were considered. And just to remind you, so one of the options considered was the inclusion of the site that we're promoting, because that site had been through a sustainability appraisal and was considered deliverable. Sorry, so that's me. Sorry, that's me. Sorry, sir. So that's, yeah, so the site that we're promoting was considered sustainable, was considered deliverable. So that issue has been addressed in the past. In response to the point made by Mr. Elvin about the potential for double counting if you provide for an uplift in the housing provision, I'd make this point, and it goes back to the point made by Councillor Pavlovich in relation to the latest census figures. And the census figures do show a relatively low level of population growth relative to other towns and large urban areas in Yorkshire. But in some respects, it's been a self-fulfilling prophecy, because again, as has been discussed in previous sessions, there has been persistent under-delivery. There's been persistent under-delivery of housing, not just since the start of this plan period, but stretching back, as the council's papers themselves acknowledge, stretching back to 2004-05. And if there has been persistent under-delivery of housing, well, of course that will feed in to lower population growth in the city. So I would disagree with Mr. Elvin that if you did provide for an uplift, you would be in danger of double counting for that very reason.
Yeah, just on that point, as I recall, and Mr. Elvin will tell me if I get this wrong, Mr. Elvin's note of caution was specifically, as I took it, in relation to doing an Oxford, as I think he put it, and setting out to meet all of the affordable housing need rather than an uplift that might address part of it.
Thank you, sir. That's a helpful clarification. But I think my point is still valid, that I think the level of under-delivery of housing in the city for the past 15 or more years has essentially artificially suppressed the population growth within the city. And so for that reason alone, I think an uplift would be justified. So they're kind of the main points I wanted to get across to you at this point. I obviously have some points to make on the 1.4, but I think you probably come onto that separately. Thank you.
How much of an uplift, Mr. Keogh?
Sorry, I think in our evidence we were looking at something in our evidence to the submission draft and subsequent stages of the plan. We felt that something along the lines of 1,900, 1,100 plus as a starting point. I know others have come up with higher figures, which we wouldn't disagree with. I know the evidence from Litchfields, for example. But again, I think you're looking at something around 1,100
just to help me once again with my mental arithmetic, do you know what that is expressed as a percentage?
Of the OAN, I don't sort of know. I'd have to, in fact, I could do it right now.
That's fine. If you don't know off the cuff, I can do that calculation myself.
Okay, yeah.
Are we assuming that that's a plan figure or an annual figure?
So, sorry, Mr. Allen.
Is that a plan period uplift or an annual uplift, Mr. Keir?
That would be an annual uplift to the annual housing requirement, yeah.
Oh, so that's to say setting the requirement at 1,100.
Yes, yeah.
It's not an uplift of 1,100.
No.
I was going to say that would give you
that
would be meeting a need of 16,000.
No, I'm not suggesting that an uplift. No, I beg your pardon, sir. It's an uplift to a figure of 1,100 per annum.
Yeah. Would that entail delivering market housing that isn't needed?
I don't think it would, sir, for the reason I mentioned earlier. There's been such a significant under-delivery of housing in the city in years gone by that I don't think you would be over-delivering on market housing. It also depends, sir, as I've set out in response to 1.4, as to how you actually address that uplift, or how you meet that uplift, whether you simply apply it across the board, or whether you actually target it at specific sites that would deliver a greater proportion of affordable housing, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the uplift that we're talking about here, or the means of addressing the shortfall between supply and need, is through an uplift to the housing requirement. So that's a separate issue from anything in relation to the thresholds in the policy.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that generates about a plan period addition of about 4,000 extra houses over the plan period. Has Mr. Keogh given thought to how they would be delivered?
Well, we obviously have put forward one site that would deliver almost half that additional uplift.
I won't say that's very convenient, Mr. Keogh, but it is.
It is very convenient, yes. But also there are, sorry, Mr. Evans, there are others around the table who have put forward other means by which an uplift to the housing requirement could be met. And I'll leave it to them to make their submissions on that.
Mr. Natkus.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate I'm going to be on slightly thin ice here because I'm just going to say that I'd looked at this question slightly different and changed the word pragmatic to positive, looking at the test of soundness, because you will probably ask us throughout this about if this is a matter of soundness or just it being changed. So I think one of those is that the plan should be positively prepared, and I think with regards to affordable, it hasn't been. So it may be argued that the council have taken a balanced approach, but I think they actually have to take a positive approach. So in terms of this, the council fully accept that they can't meet the needs in full, and I don't think any of us around this table are suggesting that they should or arguing with that point. Within their statement, they say that they're addressing as much as possible, but I respectfully disagree with that for a number of points. I think they could be more positive. There's a number of other interventions that they can do. There's going to be a discussion on students. Mr. Keogh has mentioned it already, that's actually included within the supply that doesn't deliver any affordable housing. So actually taking that out of the supply is a positive intervention, and filling that backlog with market homes would deliver more affordable housing. And again, the council have mentioned on a few occasions how the OEN was met, and none of us want to go back over that again, but at the time we discussed it a few weeks ago, I didn't see any reason why we couldn't have another uplift on. Unfortunately, I think that's been confirmed today by the council that you are quite within your rights to add the uplift to the economic update that's been done. But it is a matter of planning judgment. And there's some examples of other places, and I think we have to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt because everywhere's very different. And nowhere's quite like York, I think it's probably fair to say, in terms of its history and the matter of affordable housing. So we've heard that the plan delivers 38% of the affordable need. That might actually be slightly lower, just because we now hear that that need's increased. So if you'd redid the calculation, it might drop a little bit further, 36, 37. I don't know, because I've not done the maths. So the question really for me is the position in York justifiable to increase that and to put another uplift on? And if we just look at some of the background figures, the need 2012 to 32 has now increased. We've heard that this morning. The affordability ratios are above the national and regional average, not just over, they're significantly over, and they're growing. It's amongst the highest in the region, and it's actually the biggest increase percentage-wise in the region. If you look at its change over time, the affordability ratio has increased proportionately in York greater than anywhere else. So I think at the moment, Harrogate strictly has a higher ratio. However, over the last 3 or 4 years, it hasn't grown as quickly as York has, which shows the acute problem that York has. In terms of its delivery, just on that point, it was talked about how it might be slightly different because people who are living at home, I think the point was almost they could live at home a little bit longer until they have more money so they could move home. And I just don't think that's a justifiable position. I don't think, well, I can remember when I was 25, 30, 35 and living with my parents, we'd have probably killed each other. So putting that as a policy choice for people to do that, I don't think we should look at. 2012 to 2019, what EXCYC 36 tells us is that 693 homes were delivered, 17%. But again, if we apply the new need, that's actually probably lower again, maybe by 1 or 2 percentage points. And actually what table 14 tells us, which we touched on a few weeks ago, is that over 2 years there was actually a reduction of 7 homes once you took the right to buy in from 27 to 2019. And we don't have the figures after that, but I would imagine that they're very low in terms of what has been delivered. So in terms of the specifics of York, it's got a significant undersupply over the last 10 years. It's actually seen less affordable homes in 2019 than it had in 2017, which I think is unprecedented and something that we do need to intervene in. And ultimately what this plan does is give us the chance to do that. So in very simple semantics, is 38% positively prepared? It sounds quite a big number, but actually if we flip it round, what it means is that 62%, which is a huge number, aren't actually being met. So there's significantly more people not getting the affordable homes that they need than those aren't. So I think it's really difficult to say that we're being positive when we're proactively planning for less people to get a home than the amount of people who won't get a home. So from my perspective, I think at least 50% is where you should be aiming in order to look at that to be classed as positive, or 51%, because at least then we're giving more people a home than not. So in terms of the alternatives, personally, I think plan intervention is the way that we have to do this. When you look at the council's figures in terms of where the deliveries come from over the years, what we can see from table 10 of CYC 36 is that the vast majority of affordable homes are coming through strategic allocations and the draft housing allocations. Looking at the council's housing delivery programme sites, the sites granted since 2017, the older persons programme and windfall projections, that gets us 196 homes, which is about 4 months worth of supply. So that's the only other way that affordable homes are identified in here as being delivered, and it barely touches anything. You know, it's just nothing in terms of what it's doing. So the real intervention is coming from that. What this plan's going to do is set really tight green belt boundaries for the first time. So actually the windfall opportunities are really limited, and we'll come on to this when we get to the next phase, but the boundaries are so tight that there aren't really any, there's no white land, there's no sites that could come forward, and whilst we talk about monitoring, if the monitoring shows we're not meeting it, I'm not actually sure what we could do, because there is no safeguarded land anymore, there's no white land, or even the allocations have got very tightly drawn boundaries. They're not looking beyond to the next plan period. So windfall is going to be really difficult to come. If we look at the evidence for that, again, paragraphs 24 and 25, of CYC 36 actually tell us that between 2017 and 2020, that only 12 affordable homes were granted planning permission through windfall sites in a 3-year period. I mean, I think if you were to extrapolate that into the future, well, I actually worked this out once because I said it at planning committee. If you did that as a yearly provision of 4 per year, if the Vikings started delivering that when they first came to York, they still wouldn't have met the need. You know, it's crazy how few have been coming forward. So I think just simply saying there are some other policies and they allow exceptions is going to be really difficult to do. So for me, the only option that is available to us is to increase the overall requirement, which would again increase the affordable. And what we can see from CYC 36, because the stats are in there, that strategic sites will deliver on average 23% affordable housing, and smaller sites under 5 hectares on average 30% affordable housing. So again, just as a broad median figure, 1 in 4 homes from any new allocations would be affordable, which would start to increase that. I'm as concerned as anyone about getting a plan in place. I think we all want a plan in place. We all understand that it needs to be done. But this is such an important issue that I think we need to think really carefully about it. And I think the point that I would just make in terms of that, it shouldn't delay the plan, because the plan's had higher numbers in the past. It's had previous allocations that are no longer there. It's done sustainability appraisal, it's consulted on them, and they've been deleted in the past. Equally, some of the strategic sites have had bigger boundaries. So it's quite simple to go back through previous drafts and find sites that have been there, considered acceptable, considered sustainable, and consulted on, and actually reinsert them very quickly. So if a decision was made that there does need to be an uplift, then actually getting those sites and bringing them forward can be done really quickly and shouldn't delay this plan given the next phase of hearings that we've got and likely modifications. So I'd suggest that the exact circumstances of York are unprecedented, but really important that we do deliver this affordable housing. We should get to at least 50%. The only way to do it is to increase the number, but that isn't a problem because the sites are there and it can be done pretty quickly.
Yeah, my apologies. I can't read the nameplate from here.
It's all right, thank you. It's Mrs Harding, Joanne Harding from the Home Builders Federation. Mr Natkis has said much of what I was going to say, but I'll try and stick to the points that he hasn't covered. So first off, I'd like to say that I think the HBF would be supportive of the Council including a target for affordable homes in the plan, and to keep that monitored to ensure delivery and to ensure the figure stays appropriate. As has been set out in our hearing statements, we have concerns about the provision of affordable homes and that they don't reflect the affordable need identified. And obviously, from what we've heard already today, the affordable housing need has increased since I wrote the hearing statements in terms of the evidence provided, but also that the Council are proposing changes to Policy H10 in terms of the thresholds and the requirement. So again, that's potentially reducing the actual supply that's going to come forward. So again, we have concerns in relation to that, and we think that that means that it will be 37% of the affordable housing need potentially being met if all those figures come forward, as Ms Natkis has mentioned in Table 10 of the Council's affordable housing note. We also think that an housing uplift to meet those affordable needs is justified for similar reasons that have just been set out. But we'd also just like to highlight that obviously there are benefits in terms of sustainability of meeting that housing need for those people in affordable housing need, as well as other sustainability benefits in terms of reduced commuting potentially as well that need to be considered, not just the fact that it's an increase in housing or the greater need for land potentially. And again, we'd also emphasise that we think that increase is deliverable. There are plenty of developers and house builders who've been involved in this examination and have sat around this table with provision for sites that could come forward. Thank you.
What level of uplift, Mrs Harding, do you say would be justified?
We haven't specified a level of uplift, but I would agree with what Mr Natkis said in terms of rather than 37% of the need, potentially 50% of the need would be a much more appropriate figure.
Mr. Lane.
Thank you, sir. I won't repeat much of what's already been said. Some very good points, I might add. I agree with Mr. Natkis. The plan hasn't been positively prepared. If it had, it would do more to meet the needs of the most vulnerable members of the York community. The council should seek to do as much as it can do. I accept the point that the councils make that it would be impossible to meet the full needs for affordable housing. That's unrealistic, but they should at least attempt to provide 50% of the need, or as much of it as they can possibly do. I mean, it is a worsening situation in York. The waiting list has increased. I think 5 years ago it was 1,100. Today it stands at 1,736. And as you'll note from our evidence, that's for every affordable house that is available, there's 100 applicants. I mean, that demonstrates a poor position, and the council should do more to meet it. York, in its plan preparation process, is unusual because, unlike most authorities, which identify a handful of sites and stick with them, this authority has identified many sites that have been allocated, deleted, found to be sustainable, found to be appropriate, but for whatever reason, no longer feature it in the plan. It is evident that they could find the land, they've already been assessed, and I can see no reason why the council shouldn't strive to provide more affordable homes on those sites the council have previously identified to be appropriate. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Merritt.
Thank you. Obviously, support a lot of the preceding speakers' comments. But if I can address a couple of specific points. In terms of question 1.2, there was a lot of discussion earlier about the PPG, but if we go back to the NPPF 2012, para 47, the first bullet point, says that planning authorities should use their evidence base to ensure that their local plan meets the full, objectively assessed needs for market and affordable housing. Now, obviously, I have to acknowledge that the subsequent court decisions has in effect modified that, but the ambition of the NPPF is pretty clear in terms of what you should be trying to do. And I think the difficulty here, as has been alluded to, is the way that the council has approached this affordable housing issue. Eamon Keogh flagged to you in the phase 2 hearings the actual political process that the council had undertaken. And I think the reality is that what has happened here is the number one objective of the council was to minimise intrusion into the draft green belt. And what has happened is that, in effect, the housing provision, including the affordable housing, has in effect been a secondary consideration. Basically, what they've tried to do is get away with the least numbers possible in terms of the overall housing provision. And the affordable has dropped out of the assessment of what sites can provide. So in that sense, the plan has not been positively prepared. It's been actually significantly distorted. And the comment was made by Mr. Lane in terms of the sites appearing and dropping out. That again reflects the political process. I think if you look at the sites that have dropped out and been reduced, they probably correlate fairly well with the seats held by the political administrations of the date. And again, it reflects a failure to deliver this plan in the correct manner. Both Mr. Natkis and Mr. Lane pointed to the ability to address increased numbers, and I hope that is one that you can take up without completely disrupting this process and allowing us to get an adopted plan, which we recognise must be the prime objective, to bring some certainty to the planning position in York, so that we can actually...
My apologies, Mr Mayor. I wasn't sure what you meant there about disrupting the process.
We obviously want to see the plan adopted at the end of this process. We do not want to go back to square one. The fact that there are sites that have been considered and approved at various stages, and the fact that some sites were reduced in size, is something that hopefully allows appropriate modifications without, in effect, terminating the plan process. So we'd very, very much support that particular approach. Can I, in terms of some of the specific comments that were made, Mr. Gardner's comment about other options becoming possible over time, I think that's a complete misreading of the reality of the housing situation in York. As we've pointed out, we don't just have high house prices, we have exceptionally high rent levels, and particularly the bottom quartile rent levels. So the reality is that people who live and rent in York in commercial settings actually aren't able to save. They do not have the ability to get out of rented accommodation other than leaving the city, which is what some people do, in order to get out of that situation. So I think the comments about other options becoming possible over time, as I say, is a major misreading of the reality. If we look at the provision of affordable housing, obviously there are different mechanisms. The council can build its own council housing, or it can work with registered social landlords to provide. But there are limits in terms of the limitations of the council's housing revenue account, in terms of what's available, and its overall borrowing programme, which again is certainly in terms of the current council, is quite near the limits. So there is a limit to how much affordable the council can actually deliver directly or in association with RSLs. We know that RSLs would like to provide more housing in this, more affordable housing in this city, but the big problem, basically there's two avenues: either the Section 106 agreements that come out of new development, or them being able to acquire sites in their own right and build themselves. But the reality is that the land prices in the city and the availability of land is such that that's very difficult. So if you actually look at the comparative delivery of directly provided RSL as opposed to Section 106, you'll find that the new provision in York in the recent period is much lower than virtually anywhere else in this region because of that particular difficulty. So that therefore means that the prime mechanism to address the vast bulk of the affordable housing need has to be via the local plan, by allocations, by maximising the thresholds for affordable housing on each site. But as I say, also in uplifting the overall housing total to go towards that. If you look at the evidence base, you'll see that the 2011 to 15 administration did make some efforts to do that. The 2014 version of the local plan, which was narrowly rejected by council at least just before submission, did actually have a much higher overall housing provision, including a higher affordable housing element. So in principle, assuming that the officers advised that council reasonably effectively and efficiently, it is possible to actually significantly improve the affordable housing delivery out of this plan. So we certainly support the drift of your earlier interventions in terms of raising the overall total. You will see from our submission that we suggested the figure of 1135 in our original submission as the annual housing delivery figure, touched on possibly a lower value at 1070 in the second one. Frankly, we'd much prefer the first, But you know, that's been there throughout our submissions, because the housing situation in the city is the biggest challenge for working people. You know, A, getting hold of housing, but B, you know, the financial consequences for household incomes of having to pay so much towards it. So I'd certainly encourage you to support those issues.
Just so I'm clear, you mentioned 1135 there.
Yes.
Can you just clarify that for me?
That was based on, in effect, sorry.
Do you mean increase the plan's housing requirement to 1135?
Yes, up to that overall figure, yes. And obviously, as you said, we'll go to look at the thresholds later, but we will want to make some points on the actual threshold side as well. Thank you.
Mr. Keogh?
Sorry, sir. I just lift my triangle up.
Mr. Elvin?
First thing, the consideration of the affordability options was assessed in the original options assessment for the sustainability appraisal. That is document SD007C, and the pages you need to look at, and I'm looking at the internal pages of Appendix 6. Page 126, which is the housing target, where it specifically opts, it considers whether to go for full provision for affordable housing, the Oxford option, as it were, and doesn't take that. It accepts that there will be a lower delivery. It was then based on the North Yorks SHMA, which ironically came up with a figure of 790. Which is higher, but there it is. The affordability issue is then considered at pages 136 to 138 in section 12 of the options essay, and you'll find the conclusions to that in the preferred option at page 197. That seeks, oddly considering what we were discussing earlier, a dynamic annual target to allow it to respond to changes in circumstances. And it seeks option 4, which, as we've already accepted, isn't really very well translated into either H10 or SS1. And as I said, we'll come up with a response to that in due course and drafting. I'm going to ask Ms. Bartle just to indicate a couple of points, but can I just take, for the sake of example, the HBF suggestion of 50% of the should be the target for the affordable housing. That is to say, 4736 as opposed to 9472. That would present an annualised requirement in terms of affordability of 296. The annualised requirement for 3,600, which is our current estimate, though that's being revised, as you know, is 225. We need to look at this because it may be that there is sufficient headroom in the figures to accommodate a higher target. But I can't say that for certain at the moment, and we need to look at that.
Yeah, my apologies. I just didn't quite follow that. If you could explain that to me even more simply.
The difference between the 36%, which are current 3,600, which, as you know, we're reviewing, and the House Builders Federation of 50% is a relatively small annualised increase from 225 per annum to 296. And we would like just to look to see, when we're reviewing the 3,600 figure, to see what scope there is within the headroom that we think exists to increase the target so that the starting point is above the 36%, which is currently represented. It was just below 40%, but the recent figures, of course, drove it down a couple of percent. So we're not resistant to increasing the target, but we just need to have a look at it.
Sorry, when you say the headroom, what do you mean by that, Mr. Elvin?
Sorry,
When you say the headroom, what precisely do you mean by that?
but I don't want to say anything more definitive than that because we need to look at the figures again.
That's in terms of the existing supply, rather than a question of adding to the supply.
Indeed, yes, yes. And that's assuming the supply, as we've discussed through the strategic sites in coming weeks, remain as the capacities and etc. remain as they are. So, as we said earlier, slightly moving feast.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, if you could have a look and let us know, we'd be grateful for that. That might affect how you answer my next question, which was, well, if I agree with others, or if we agree with others that there should be some uplift to the plan requirement. What, in the council's view, would that uplift need to be, or what should it be?
Well, I think I've just covered it. Councillor Merritt, Mr. Merritt's points, they are all points that appear in the plan anyway. We are only too well aware of the housing price problems in York and the difficulties in terms of mobility of those looking for houses and to seek not to commute. However, a choice has been made, and it doesn't appear to be disputed by at least a number of the parties, that we cannot meet the entire affordable housing need. We would look to see if we can increase the percentage, because, as I've said, our preferred approach, I think, in modification would be to fix a target but require it to be monitored on a regular basis so that it responds to changing circumstances. And clearly we will need to look, when we come to the strategic sites, at what percentage affordable housing can be generated from each site. So can I park that question in the way that I've suggested, in the hope that we can produce a constructive response?
I'm going to move along to issue 1.4, which contemplates the notion of there being a need for an uplift and what the effect of such an uplift might be. If I look to the council in the first instance, this was issue 1.4, Mr. Elvin.
Before handing over to Ms Bartle, of course, as I've said, the sustainability appraisal looked at those particular issues. You've also got the sustainability appraisal as to why sites were modified over time by reference to the various factors which are influencing the local plan and why some sites were removed and others changed. For example, ST15 moved eastwards and various other changes were made. So the choices that have been made are set out in detail over the time of the sustainability appraisal, and they are based on the various factors which drive the policy making in York, including setting of the historic centre and those other factors. Yes, Paul can deal with this.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, we don't actually consider it to be appropriate to have to have such an uplift, and as you potentially alluded to earlier, it would deliver greater numbers of market housing, which we do not believe are required.
Just to make it absolutely clear, the suggestion I was making earlier in respect of 1.3 is to look at what delivery can do without necessarily uplifting the housing requirement, just so no one's under any doubt that I'm not suggesting we're going to come back with Mr Keogh's 1,100 per annum or something of that description. And by the way, the figures for his site were not as he stated. His site in his matters statement is suggesting 700 affordable homes from that side, not 2,000.
Mr Keogh.
Yes, sir, thank you. When I was talking about, when you asked me the question about what the uplift should be, I was looking at the uplift in terms of the overall housing number, not in terms of just the uplift to the affordable housing, or any particular site could deliver in terms of affordable housing. I think when I suggested 1,100, you said that would be in the region of about 4,000 units across the planned period for all housing. My point was our site would deliver just under 50% of that total need, of which 700 approximately will be affordable.
Mr Natcris.
Thank you, sir. It's just a quick point on the SA, because it's been raised a few times now, but the SA effectively assessed the decision to reduce the housing requirement, so it then looked at the sites and the various different options. So if you go back in time to when the housing requirement was higher, there is an SA that says that the sites we're talking about are acceptable. So it isn't a case that on day one an SA was done in order to get to the housing number. It's just that the new one was based on a lower housing number. And what it did is it justified the deletion of a number of sites. And I'm no doubt when you look at it, it will say that there are a number of benefits to a certain number of criteria by deleting those houses, but there'll clearly be a negative in terms of delivery of affordable housing. So I think we just have to be really careful that the current SA is predicated on a lower housing number, and it doesn't dismiss the sites that we're all talking about that were previously draft allocations for other reasons, that they suddenly became unsustainable or unsuitable overnight. It was because the housing number dropped in total. And just the other point, I did mention it in my last answer, but just because it is under this, just to reiterate, that we very quickly noted the impact of an uplift would be any increase in strategic sites, 1 in 5 homes, but any increase in housing allocations, of which there are sites under 5 hectares, 1 in 3 of every one of those homes would be an affordable home, based on the Council's evidence in CYC 36. So actually, you do get quite an uplift on some of those sites.
Mr Natcris misunderstood what I was saying about the SA. I was giving you the references to the policy choice not to meet the affordable need in full, not a wider question, but he's also incorrect about the policy choices that were made. The position is much more nuanced than he suggests, and there are a whole range of factors which caused amendments to the strategic allocations. It wasn't simply a lop off the worst because of the housing numbers have gone down. There are a whole series of factors, and I think I referred you to some of the appendices in the lengthy note I provided in response to Fulford Parish Council's note on the SA.
Is there anything else on issue 1.4, or do we feel that we've covered that? Excellent. I'll move then on to issue 1.5 and policy H10. And very simply, is policy H10 soundly based and consistent with national policy?
in our view, it is both of those. We point to the fact that the policy responds to the need that we've just been hearing about, and is written in the context of paragraph 50 of the NPPF, which confirms local authorities can set policies for meeting needs on-site, or unless off-site provisional financial contribution is broadly equivalent, of a broadly equivalent value, can be robustly justified. So it's really within that that we've established the policy approach. It's considered to be a positive and proactive one, which acknowledges the sensitivities around deliverability of contributions on smaller sites and not wanting to jeopardise the viability of those smaller sites coming forward, but seeking to maximise opportunities for those contributions to be made where they are viable. Paragraph 31 of the PPG, which you may not have.
Just to be absolutely clear, it's paragraph 31, 23B 31, 2016-1116, and it's in the planning obligations. And it was introduced following the written ministerial statement, which modified the 10 houses or fewer point and added in the floor space as well. So it reflects that. But we've got copies, should you?
Yes, please.
Yes. We spent half an hour trying to find it in the National Archive, of course. And it was replaced when the NPPF was revised, so it goes with the 2012 NPPF.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, so we have considered the policy in the way that the PPG is phrased, and the exception that is given to the contributions of 10 units or less, and which have a maximum combined floor space of more than 10,000 square metres. 1,000 square metres, and it's against that point that the council has considered its approach to seeking contributions to those smaller sites that is taken forward in policy H10.
My apologies, I didn't follow that. I think you were telling me why you don't need to comply or be consistent with the 10 units or less point, I think.
Yeah, no, it is consistent on the basis that we're taking the 1,000 square metres as the threshold. So the policy approach that is taken forward in H10 is one which captures those sites of up to of more than 1,000 square metres in accordance with the PPG.
Yes, it's only 10 sites or fewer which have less than 1,000 square metres which are excluded, applying the first bullet point in that paragraph.
I think you're telling me that rather than using the units as the measure, you're using the square meterage as the measure. Is that
yeah,
right?
that's absolutely right, yes. So that was taken into account. And the policy, as originally drafted, attempted to look at those sites of a variety of different typologies and apply a contribution, a financial contribution that would relate to its context. And we accepted that that was perhaps a very convoluted approach, and a much more simplified version has been proposed.
Yeah, well, if it helps, we agree with you in terms of it being a less than straightforward approach. But just on the point about this point about square meterage, again, it may well be because I'm being a bit dense today. I don't know, but I think you're telling me that you're using the square meterage rather than the units. But the policy relates to units.
Well, so could I just ask you to? I was just going to say, can I ask you to turn at page 116 of the Reg 19 plan? Because you'll see there is a footnote to the policy, footnote 2, which for sites of 10 or fewer, it also applies the 1,000. Yeah, so, I'm sorry, Laura. Sorry, I interrupted it. But you'll see, of course, if you're over 10 dwellings, then it doesn't matter because you tick the box anyway. It's only if you're under it, you need to also apply the 1,000 square metres. And that's what is done here, because you've got to read it where you've got sites, say, urban brownfield sites 5 to 10. They have to have a maximum combined gross floor space. So it's actually both. Obviously, if you're over the threshold, then you don't need to consider the combined square footage or square meterage. Was I making that as clear as mud?
We think we kind of follow, but I'd like to more than kind of follow.
Well, it's the minister's fault. He's inclined to say. The minister, in the written ministerial statement, modified the threshold of 10 and said the threshold of 10 didn't apply if you had a combined square meterage of over 1,000 square metres. And so that was then translated into the PPG in the paragraph I've mentioned. So where you've got dwellings of 10 or fewer listed in table 5.4, they only qualify because footnote 2 applies if the combined square meterage is 1,000 or more.
Yeah, I might scratch my head a little bit more about that over lunch shortly. And if I'm still not clear, I'll come back to you. It may well be that Mr. Griffiths can educate me and enlighten me over lunch. But just one question, which might be a pretty ignorant one, depending on whether or not I get to understand this at some point. Yeah, so to know the square meterage, to know the square meterage, do you need to know, though, the internal floor space area?
Yes. Is that leading you to ask a question on the number?
Do you know, I don't know. I'm actually going to park my entire questioning on this until I've rethought about it over lunch.
I think the point is that if you have a number of dwellings less than 10, let's say 4, but they're 4 really big dwellings, then you can make a contribution, or you should make a contribution.
And it's gross internal area.
Yeah.
So it's like all affordability issues. It all comes in at the development management stage when you have viability assessments. And you simply have to assess the GIA when the application comes in. And if the GIA is in excess of 1,000, even if there are fewer than 10, you apply the percentage in the policy.
I feel considerably closer to being clear on that. No.
As Mr. Henderson reminds me, the GIA has got to go on the application, planning application form.
Would you like me to continue the attempts to...
I would, once I've reassembled myself, yes, thank you. Yes, as long as you don't confuse me any further.
I'll certainly attempt not to. Okay, so the approach establishes an off-site financial contribution associated and directly linked to the floor space trigger. The percentage of that contribution, as was originally proposed in H10, there were different percentages attributed to different types of sites, effectively, which we also felt was slightly unclear and unhelpful from a decision-making point of view. So we also recognised that in reality, in practice, very unlikely that sites of below 5 would reach that trigger of the 1,000 square metres floor space, and as such tried to improve its effectiveness by simplifying it to an approach that simply seeks a contribution to those sites of between 5 and 14 dwellings at a flat percentage rate of 10%. This has been tested through additional viability work, which I'll shortly invite my colleague, Mr. Marshall, to comment on. And that would apply across the board to all sites, regardless of whether it's greenfield or brownfield, which is, as I say, is proven to be viable in the most recent work. So that leaves the on-site contribution as sites of 15 or more with percentages attributed according to whether they're greenfield or brownfield, and that differential of 20 or 30% is applied. At this stage, we haven't made any further modifications to the policy, though we have noted the comments that have come forward in the hearing statement, and I'm sure questions will emerge through discussion shortly around some of the other aspects which we can comment on, but perhaps invite Tom to talk through the appendix and the viability work that was done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I appreciate this is quite hot off the press, isn't it? And you won't have had much kind of sight of this. As Laura mentioned, the aim of the note is really to look at the scope of whether a potentially simpler policy for H10 could be seen as kind of viable at the cumulative impact of all the other policy asks of the plan. It uses our submitted viability work as a base, so we're not really introducing anything new, any new assumptions. So when I talk about our previous viability work, I'm referring to CD018, and there's a document which is the addendum report, which I think was the discussed in the phase 2 hearings are relating to infrastructure. I believe that's the appendix 2 of the matter 6 document. Okay. What we have done is we've kind of focused on the really small typologies, since they're the one that are going to fall within that off-site financial contribution. So we've tested 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 14 units. These are the kind of lower and upper figure of what would have been the affordable thresholds. I mentioned earlier they've been tested at the kind of the full policy ask. So that's to say that the headrooms show kind of what is left over in the scheme once all those kind of other policies have been taken into account. By which I mean kind of biodiversity negating, electric charging vehicles, and all the others. I think you might have the document in front of you now, but if I direct you to table 3, we do that kind of, that's where all our results really, and that's the kind of the headrooms that I've indicated. It's a per unit figure, and essentially what that's showing us at the typologies are the rows, and the columns are the different affordable housing percentages. With this off-site contribution, and it's really showing that up until 10 and 11% affordable housing, the vast majority of typologies are green, have a positive headroom, and we'd consider as viable. When you get into 15% and 17% and beyond that, you have a weakening viability picture. So our conclusion really, therefore, is just to suggest that the proposed modifications relating to H10 of the off-site financial contribution are, in our opinion, viable alongside the other the other policy asks.
So compared then to the more sophisticated policy in the submitted plan, the proposed modification, then, if I understand it, has effects on viability across the different types of typologies, maybe one way or the other, but overall, in your view, doesn't affect the whole plan viability. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, at least I understood that. Yeah, and just to be clear, the council said quite early doors today that you would look at the trajectory of affordable housing and as part of that exercise to firm up what is expected, anticipated to be delivered over the planned period, and presumably then that work will take into account this proposed main modification.
Indeed it would, although we would suggest, although we haven't run the figures, that it would make a very limited impact, or have very limited impact on delivery, because we're referring here to the really very small sites and those contributions, so it's unlikely to impact overall supply figures tangibly.
So the point of this modification then wasn't really about, for example, squeezing additional affordable housing out of any particular type of site or anything like that. It was rather more about achieving a simpler, more effective policy.
Indeed, and practically useful and effective, but wanting to retain the underpinning principle that here in York there was a consideration and an assessment that had taken place that justified seeking those contributions from those smaller sites in a way that we've tried to do, albeit hopefully simplified.
And what you said, we said we would do, so that would also tie in with reviewing the percentage target for meeting the affordable housing need as well, that I indicated later.
Mr Johnson.
Thank you, sir, and well spotted at that distance. I haven't spoken yet today on the other points that have been raised by my colleagues, but I do generally agree with the points made. But just coming to this particular point, and I have to say I've started off with a degree of confusion on this, and hopefully I can just ask a few questions and we can clarify this, because we seem to have moved now to a policy where affordable housing kicks in at 5 dwellings, and 5 to 15 dwellings is an off-site contribution. Therefore, anything below 5 dwellings doesn't pay an affordable housing contribution. But on that point, what I would say is that the 1,000 square metre reference is a bit of a red herring, because the 1,000 square metre relates to 10 dwellings, and the average size of a dwelling is 100 square metres, which is in effect the 1,000 square metres. So if you're going to start affordable housing policy and then apply a square meterage, then surely you start at 500 square metres for 5 dwellings, not 1,000 square metres, because that's the calculation to where the 1,000 square metre flows from 10 dwellings. It's in effect 100 square metres per dwelling. So you'd have to change the 1,000 square metres. And dropping the threshold to 5 is not something that I'm actually opposed to, even though the framework talks about the 5 being in rural areas. I think what we're recognising here is that York's got such an affordable housing problem that it probably does need to start at 5. My only question then comes back to, I think it was Tom and his calculation, because I'm trying to get